Well, I got to push back a little bit on you saying that Shanghainese food is. What did you say at the beginning of this? Basically, Shanghainese food is the enemy. I'm in Shanghai at one of my favorite noodle shops, Yiguihe. It's a real nostalgic Shanghainese, old school feeling noodle shop with Lucas Sin, a chef, soon to be cookbook author, video host.
On the way lah.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is also one of my favorite noodle shops.
Yeah?
Yeah. Because the thing is, I don't really like Shanghainese noodles or Shanghainese food.
Ooh.
It's tough for a Hong Kong person to say, but my whole thing with Shanghainese noodles is that they're kind of like reverse al dente. You know, they're like so like soft in the middle, like hard on the outside. They don't really have a lot of texture, and they either don't have enough texture or they have too much texture. But this is the restaurant that kind of like changed my opinion on that. Not because of any improvement on the noodle itself, but the positioning of the noodle soup and the flavoring. Like that curry thing they do here is kind of interesting. And that sort of high pie kind of like relationship between local Shanghainese food and Western influence reminds me a lot of Hong Kong. So I really dig it here. One other thing, I always wanted to live in mainland China. And Hong Kongers don't often get the chance to live in mainland China. And so when you're here, the impetus for moving here was to experience Shanghai, but also to use Shanghai as a launch pad for travel throughout the rest of China. The most amazing Chinese food experiences are always the serendipitous ones, like the ones when you call or you text the group and you say, "Hey, let's go to Guangzhou next week to like watch pig slaughters," and you're like, I guess you like go to some tier 3, tier 4 city, and you wake up in some hotel that costs very little money. You're off to a slaughterhouse. There's no coffee in sight. You're just chugging nongfu, teas. And this guy sticks the pig, and suddenly 2 hours later, you're like taking pigs out of the ground. Like those sort of experiences, you can only get when you're actually based here. I have to say, the most interesting parts of Chinese food culture are not as accessible as you want them to be.
So, how much of what's happening, even just if we talk about China, that's even too big. If we talk about just Shanghai, how much of what you see happening in Shanghai is represented overseas in Chinese restaurants?
I think this type of modernity in restaurant building comes about when the money is coming in, the capital is flowing into New York, and there was a big pause during COVID where people were not investing in restaurants anymore, and so you didn't see brands, large Chinese brands coming into the US like they would have before COVID. Now it's starting to pick up. Haiti is there, like Din Tai Fung opened the first location in New York City, but that's that capital, that economics plus the immigration that supports it. When those pieces are in place, then you see this sort of like, scalable big restaurant starting to build.
Right.
The other side of it, that's the supply side. The demand side of it is that you need to see people wanting this type of food, and oftentimes you get this through the immigration of people from specific regions. So the development of new Chinatowns that aren't just Southern Chinese, Guangzhou, Toisan, Hong Kong kind of populations means they have cravings for other types of flavor profiles, and in so doing, when they demand those restaurants come to be. So you see slivers of that type of thing outside of Shanghai, definitely.
Right. Yeah. It's really a fraction of what's here, right?
Definitely. I mean, like
the variety in Shanghai.
I don't know what the percentage feels like, but it at least feels like 10 years ago. You know? Like we're getting, like people are excited about the first Haidilao. That's the ancient history in Shanghai. Right.
So you touched a little bit about the difference between Chinese food and Chinese American food.
Yes.
And a lot of people say that they're different cuisines.
Right.
Like that's kind of in fashion to say they're different cuisines. But are they really different cuisines? And like I wanted to talk a little bit about where the overlap is.
Yeah.
Are they really different cuisines, or is there some shared DNA there?
One way to think about it is to think about, because I do believe that American Chinese food is a regional Chinese cuisine that so happens to exist outside of the borders of China. And so the question of what the overlap between the regional Chinese food and sort of Chinese food within China is to look at how regional Chinese cuisines exist outside of China in places like the US, sure, but also like places like Thailand, and Singapore, Korea, or wherever, right? As it exits sort of the borders of this country, what is actually shared? One is, if you look at the people who are carrying this cuisine abroad, that oftentimes are Southern merchants, right? People who had the ability to travel and own these supply chains. Famously, sort of Hakka, Chichao, all that sort of southeast Toisan kind of like connection of people. When you see the equipment that people are cooking American Chinese food and the techniques involved, you identify a lot of Southern Chinese techniques, primarily sort of Cantonese techniques. For example, velveting meat and then passing it through water or oil before it gets stir-fried, battering something and then coating it in like a sweet and sour sauce. These like flavor profiles and ingredients you see. Oftentimes when food leaves China, to me, it feels as if when people move, ideas of food move with them and the recipes move with them, but oftentimes they can't take their own ingredients. So you have a dish like beef and broccoli that substitutes gailan, Chinese broccoli, for Western broccoli. But the sort of oyster sauce, savory sauce based stir fry technique, the velveting of the meat, the blanching of the broccoli before it all gets brought together is very, very similar. And so, and even more interesting is when we speak about cultural confluence, see what the effect of this sort of westernized Chinese food is, what that effect is on China. And I don't want to discuss American Chinese food only, in this case, also as a relic, right? Like, it's important to acknowledge the change American Chinese food itself is seeing. And I imagine that a couple of years from now, a couple of decades from now, we'll see the effect of these restaurants like perhaps Haidilao and like KT and these like larger corporations as they're moving to New York. Maybe they'll have an impact on the way Chinese food is eaten and consumed and prepared in New York.
What about the smaller independent shops where you get people who are maybe doing food from Xibei? Or I was been talking to somebody recently who wants to open a Shenzhen chain in New York City. Are they changing? Do you think they're changing what Chinese entrepreneurs and Chinese restaurant owners in North America and other places feel that they can put on their menus?
There was a little zenith of independent Chinese restaurateurship before 2020, I would say. And because we were in the restaurant industry, me and my co-founders had a WeChat group of what felt like every single independent Chinese restaurateur in town, and it was maybe 50, 60 of them. And these are oftentimes, the story is something along the lines of they born and raised in some part of China, well educated, goes over to the US, goes to design school or something and becomes very cool and stylish, and they bring in chefs and together they'll open a restaurant that is representative of their own cultural background. Like Hunan Slurp is a really great example in the East Village, was still there, where most people didn't know very much about Hunanese food. Most restaurants in the US that had the word Hunan in it were serving some variation on Sichuan, Canto, Chinese Americanized kind of thing. But Hunan Slurp made that pidan, Leijiao pidan dish. They did these wonderful rice noodles, so on and so forth. And the assertion of that regional cuisine plus the design philosophy of being incredibly stylish and knowing how to build these restaurants, plus a little bit of capital investment, meant there were a lot of these little independent restaurateurs that were popping up and introducing regionalized Chinese food to New Yorkers in particular. Now during COVID, unfortunately, I think a lot of these, many of these restaurateurs like retreated and came back over here, back home to their parents, because they didn't feel like New York was a very safe space or didn't have a place, didn't have runway for them. So I think it's not as exciting as it was perhaps a couple of years ago, but it's starting to come back. So Guizhou being represented, Hunan, Yunanese cuisine, that sort of thing. That's what New York is supposed to be really good at, right? That diversity and encouraging that sort of storytelling. I really hope it continues.
Do you think New York is the center for overseas Chinese food? You're a little bit biased.
I'm so biased. But I think if you're thinking about like old school American Chinese food, you would think about San Francisco as a bigger Chinatown. You'll think about other pockets of Chinese.
San Gabriel Valley.
Yeah, exactly. LASGV.
Yeah.
Toronto and Vancouver are incredible places to eat Chinese food. Toronto has incredible diversity in regional Chinese food because of a consistent wave of immigrants, right? And so you can get xibei cooking in Toronto, for example. Vancouver is a little bit different, where eating Cantonese food in particular in Vancouver makes me feel like I'm eating in pre-1997 Hong Kong, where there, a lot of the people who got there arrived in Vancouver before '97, and so they're cooking food that has this sort of almost regal but old school banquet style feel, and you'll see these sort of flavor profiles that you see in Hong Kong anymore. The other interesting thing, in perhaps a more modern sense, is to figure out where all the Chinese students are going to school, whether it's Frankfurt.
Right.
I've heard whispers about like Milan and Munich and things, and once those students are there and their spending power is there, there's gonna be entrepreneurs, ruthless Chinese restaurateurs just opening little restaurants to serve that population, right? I mean, that's what Chinese people are. That's how American Chinese food came about, was ruthless entrepreneurship, just money-driven decision making, to oversimplify it all. But so Chinese people are good at opening restaurants all over the world. So I'm sure that will continue.
Also, not so many other options.
Sure. Yeah. You see a lot of the Xiaohongshu posts of people moving over to Europe or whatever to study abroad, and they're so sad because they're eating slop on rice.
Or they gotta cook at home.
Right. And they're using Trader Joe's ingredients applied to Chinese recipes. Xiaohongshus are some of my favorite, where they use pizza dough to make versions of 就什么什么饼, whatever. All these things are very heartening. I think.
Oh, that's clever. That's really clever. So you said one thing in there, which is that you feel like Vancouver is kind of a bit of a relic of an older Hong Kong style. I was talking to a Cantonese chef who was in Guangzhou recently, who basically said the same thing about Hong Kong today versus Guangzhou today, which is that Hong Kong is very traditional and feels old-fashioned, whereas Guangzhou is a lot more open to new ingredients and techniques. And so I wonder what you think about that's maybe a very contentious debate from somebody from Hong Kong. But just what's the difference?
Hong Kong is better.
You think Hong Kong is better? You still have to live. You still have to live.
I have to. I still have to be from Hong Kong for the rest of my life. No, but I think there was a period of time where Hong Kong was, and we're talking, more than 20, 30 years ago, when Hong Kong is so successful as a food capital because Hong Kong restaurants and Hong Kong cuisine did a very good job of perfecting and oftentimes refining or making certain elements of Cantonese cooking more elegant, right? In the sort of dim sum parlor or banquet hall, Cantonese stir-fry restaurant context, we're talking about things like, I think Hong Kong people probably perfected the things like squab back in the day. And they were the people who made, Lei Garden would do the roast pork belly, but only roast the belly part, and then shave it off. All these little things that very you need to have people who are going to pay for that amount of craftsmanship for restaurants to open that are cooking at that caliber. And at a time when Hong Kong was economically incredible, especially in comparison to Guangzhou, that's where the cuisine, that sort of, I think it's a refining or elevation, let's call it, happens. But that was a little while ago.
That was 90s,
right?
Or 80s, 90s, right?
And so that's why Vancouver is a little bit of a relic of that sort of period of time. In Vancouver, we were at a restaurant, Chef Wong's or something. They were serving a dish that was bai zhan ji with black truffle, with truffle paste. That's so kind of old school, and kind of an old school way of thinking about fusion. It reminds me of this sort of pre-97 type of era. But anyway, that's to say that.
But it's 2025.
It's 2025.
You just said Hong Kong peaked in the 90s.
And then there's also the sort of middle tier stuff where bamboo noodles, wonton noodles. Many people I think would argue that the refining of the bamboo noodle technique and the wontons themselves, the size of the wontons to put extra whole shrimp in there was an invention of Hong Kong. The egg tarts, the dim sum, street snacks, that sort of thing. Third block that I think is really special about Hong Kong, and my favorite food in the world, is Chaan Teng, right? So Hong Kong diners being a Hong Kong-made interpretation of Western food for us Hong Kong people is, I think, a very special example and case study of cultural confluence of food, different East and West cuisine influencing each other and so on and so forth. That said, I eat all these types of foods in Hong Kong with the lens of some type of nostalgia of my own childhood, but also I think Hong Kong people should recognize that our what we get to eat in Hong Kong is conservatively quite narrow compared to any major city in mainland China in terms of regionality.
Yeah.
I remember my first Sichuan meal in Hong Kong was probably in like 2013. That's so recent,
Yeah.
I didn't grow up eating these flavor profiles.
Right.
And so getting to eat in cities like Guangzhou, everything's punched up, everything's punched open. And to this day, I do love going to Guangzhou and exploring the sort of many sub-regions around. Shunde is, as advertised, like a food heaven. Every single meal is a hit, right? Chaoshan, maybe my favorite regional Cantonese food. Like going there is a whole different thing from.
So I think one thing that people don't really recognize, if you're not here, is or not too many people do, is that Cantonese food is also is a region, but it's also regional. So you have the food on the northeastern coast of Chaozhou, and you have the food of Guangzhou. You have the food is quite different when we went to Jiangjiang in the western part, where it's supposed to be kind of tropical and a little spicy and a bit funky. So you're known for a lot of things, the fried egg guy and being
tomato egg,
the tomato egg. Yeah. But I think fairly soon, well, in the next year or two, you're going to be known as the Chaan Teng guy, right?
That's how I think of myself. So
that's the definition of yourself.
It is so, I don't know, it's just like such good comfort food.
What is it about the Chaan Teng that has inspired you to spend so much time documenting and cataloging and doing your book?
The intellectual part of it is this combination of the East and the West, but in a way that is not so fusion in the capital F type of way. Case study of how cuisines come together, I think, is really driven by the people who do it. And again, we are doing something for ourselves. We're not sort of showboating or showing the Westerners that, hey, look, we can make Western food too. It's very like, let's try to make food that we like for ourselves with the ingredients that we have. And that sort of history, Chaan Teng might feel very old, but we're looking at maybe maximum like 70 years of history, 1950s onwards. Then locking in that history and understanding it intellectually, I think, is a really great exercise to propel any chef to think about where do I draw my influences from and who am I doing it for. The second part is guttural, instinctual deliciousness encoded in my DNA. I love ketchup, baked pork chop rice. It's just my favorite food in the world. There's nothing you can do about it. I like my macaroni with soup. I like my eggs scrambled that way. The comforting part of it, it seems as if there is a connection between these sort of casual all-day restaurants, all-day diners, with between Chaan Teng and the rest of the world. Like UK has their cafes, America has their diners. Many cities seem to have this sort of like luncheonette all-day type of thing. And when you look at the menus, there's a lot of similarity, and there's a lot of similarity because the food is designed to be operationally efficient and constantly available and good for as many people as possible and served in an efficient way. That, to me, is a universal language, and so therefore I think it's worth starting to understand those types of restaurant operations from your own culture, and so that's where the Chaan Teng thing kind of...
So you're saying the Chaan Teng is just kind of the Hong Kong expression of that?
Yeah, it's like Hong Kong diner, like an American translation of that I would use,
And then to bring us all the way back, because we're sitting in Shanghai, in a Shanghai noodle shop, and being in Shanghai has also had a lot of this back and forth with Western food.
Yeah, the
high pie food over the last, say, 100 years, a little bit more than 100 years. A lot of it actually led by the Cantonese. Do you see any parallels in that with the Chaan Teng, or does that hold any interest to you?
Yeah, the most salient example of Hong Kong Western food is soy sauce Western, like Xiao Cai Tan, and those styles of restaurants where the service is a little bit well back in the day it's fancy, right? It's upgraded. People are wearing like tablecloth and people have like vests and like serving you like pastry baked on top of soup. That's very similar to Hai Pai. The Worcestershire sauce, right, is exactly the Shanghai interpretation of that, right? like Hong Kong, we also have Worcestershire, but we still use Lee parrots because it was a more robust British colony. So you have the original version.
There wasn't a boycott.
Right. Yeah. And then this became la jiang you, like
Yeah.
spicy soy sauce,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You
So
see
Worcestershire sauce without the anchovies, basically.
many Shanghainese people who come to Hong Kong still come feeling like they built Hong Kong, socially, culturally speaking. Like all of your Westernness actually often comes from us.
Yeah.
And you can see traces of it in a lot of the food that I love. So there is a very strong relationship between Shanghai and Hong Kong, and vice versa. You know,
Yeah.
Hong Kong people, even today, tourists come here all the time trying to hit all the classics because they feel a sort of kindred, perhaps. Like I feel like Hong Kong and Shanghai in a way are sister cities or like kindred
Yeah.
spirits.
Well, that being said, let's have some noodles.
Well, yeah, we should get some noodles. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I got to push back a little bit on you saying that Shanghainese food is. What did you say at the beginning of this? Basically, Shanghainese food is the enemy. I think I got to push back on that a little bit because at least like you can't say that food in Guangzhou is better than food in Hong Kong because you actually have to live in Hong Kong. I have to live in Shanghai, and I actually like the food here.
Yeah, I like it too. I just think almost the most interesting food in Shanghai isn't Shanghainese food. I think that's my takeaway.
I think you're overlooking, and maybe you've been the victim of bad ordering.
Yeah.
And also, you got to think about Shanghainese as Jiangnan food, as the whole
Yes,
region.
yeah.
That's the issue. When you expand out of Shanghai and look at the whole region, you have a lot more to choose
Right.
from.
Yes. So maybe Babangsai is kind of like the enemy.
I gotta live here, man. I gotta live here.
Totally. Like, all the good parts of Chinese food
Come from
don't
elsewhere?
yeah.
Oh my god. I do not, for the record, I do not support this view.
Cut. Actually,